Hey, how's it going? I'm Kirk of Effectatron, and today we're going to be covering Pyro, the new fire and smoke sim just released yesterday from Maxon. It is natively built into Cinema 4D. It works incredibly well at creating fire and smoke, as well as also working well with Redshift. But the problem is, it's not really that intuitive on how to get it set up. So this guide is going to just kind of be a quick start guide because there are a lot of settings with this stuff, and basically it would take hours to cover all of that. So what I'm going to do with this video is get you going, get you able to add Pyro to your scene, get you to add a material and have it actually show up on render view, because there's actually some things you have to toggle on to get it to even show up. So we're going to do that, as well as just some quality control things, some things that tips that might hopefully help you avoid some crashes and stuff like that, as well as just being able to control it a little bit and understand the basics of what you need so you can start playing around with it and actually get some cool renders. So by the end of this, you should be able to at least use Pyro and make what you see here. First off, I want to shout out to my patrons. Thank you guys so much for the support. It means a lot. If you want to support the channel, this is a really great way to do it, where you also get some perks. Also, be sure to check out DerekKirk.net for all of my courses and content that's available on Gumroad and CJ Shortcuts and Skillshare. On top of that, big shout out to Dustin over at CG Hacks. He helped me kind of figure out these settings because they really aren't that intuitive. And so he really helped me figure this stuff out. We were talking about this and playing with it last night. And so it was really helpful. So be sure to go over and check out his channel. He's got some great Photoshop and Redshift content as well. So go ahead, there's a link for that below. Go show him some love. All right, let's get started. Start with a blank scene here, and what we want to do is we want to create an object. So we're going to create a sphere, and we're just going to bring that up so it's not clipping through the floor. Now this stuff does use the cloth and simulator system. So if you want your stuff to react with your floor and stuff like that, you're going to need to add the cloth collider tag to your floor, just so you know that. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this sphere, we're going to right click, and we are going to go to simulation tags and then Pyro. This is new. Pyro, and you can see right off the bat, it's a little confusing because it creates a Pyro tag as well as a Pyro object at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. So the way these two things are kind of different is that the Pyro tag is more based on the way that this is going to look in the sense of how it's going to relate to the material that you put on this. Like you're controlling the smoke amount, the temperature amount, the fuel, how it's going to the velocity of it and the noise. Those kind of things are all in the Pyro tag, while the Pyro object is going to cover all of your Pyro stuff in your scene. So this is going to be kind of more where you're going to do turbulence, combustion, dissipation, things like that. All these settings that are going to kind of control the overall look of just smoke in general in your scene versus the individual object. And the reason they're separate is because I guess you could have multiple things burning differently in your scene. So it is a little confusing right off the bat that it creates two things. So hopefully by the end of this, you'll understand which one you need to go into to adjust some things and which one, versus the other. So, okay, so let's get started. So we have this Pyro object, and we're going to go ahead and just back it up. It's a simulation, so you have to go back to frame 0, hit play, and you're going to notice, oh my gosh, we actually get fire right off the bat. It looks incredible. It works really well in the viewport. It's super fast. This is awesome. But when we go to hit render on this, we're not going to get anything. It's just going to be a white ball here remaining because we don't have any materials on this. So let's go ahead and do that. So we go to Redshift, go to Create, Redshift Material, and now we have a new Pyro Volume material. Pyro Volume, we can throw that on the Pyro object. This is very important. Put it on the Pyro object, not your object with the Pyro tag. It needs to go on the Pyro sim, okay? And the cool thing about the Pyro Volume material is it's exactly the same as the Volume material, except it comes with all the channels kind of already preset to work with the Pyro simulation, so you don't have to hook those up. Pretty cool. So you got your temperature and everything already set up, so your stuff's going to work with your Pyro tag settings for the fuel and things like that. Okay, so now when we go in here and we hit render, we would think that we would see our render, but we still just see this white ball. So what's going on? Well, you actually have to toggle some things on for it to show up. So we're going to go to Pyro object here, and we're going to go to object tab here inside of the Pyro object. And here we see that we have on export set to these three things and off set to everything else. And basically this is like object properties. Pretty much means visibility. Do you want it to only show up on export, or do you want it to show up all the time? And we want it to be all the time. So we're just going to go ahead and turn all this stuff on because I want to see it. So basically now that we have all that stuff turned on and we have the material tag on there, now we can actually see our fire and smoke working here. So right off the bat, creates an object with a tag and its own object, and you put the material on the Pyro object, and then you come into the Pyro object, turn on all the settings. Why this isn't on by default yet, I don't know. Hopefully they'll update that just so, because it's kind of a slow workflow. Okay, so we've got it going. This is good. So now we actually have some settings where we can control our Pyro. So a couple things. One thing we need to cover for sure, voxel size. Voxel size is a 3D pixel, so think of it like, a big voxel would be like a Minecraft block, and a small voxel would be, a tiny Minecraft block. But basically, if you're finding that your scene looks really blocky and stuff, you need to lower your voxel size. Now, you might think, okay, well, then I'll just do a really small voxel size. Well, when you do that, it takes a lot longer to calculate, okay? So the default is 5, and if we came down here to 1, it's going to really take a lot longer. And so here's the question that really pops up in my mind is, okay, there's a Pyro voxel size, and then my Pyro tag on my object has an object voxel size. This is kind of for the initial boom of the initial product, and then the Pyro is more the voxel size for the smoke and stuff that's coming off of it is kind of what I understand. So pretty much just set them to be the same regardless, but we're actually just going to do 3 for right now so that we can kind of have a faster sim, okay? So go ahead and back this up, hit play on this. You can see already that it's slower, but it does look like it has a little more detail. As we come in here, we can see, we can take a look at this. I mean, this is just cool that this is built in here now. Right, so we can come in here, we can say Redshift render view. Take a look at this. Yeah. So pretty cool, pretty clean right off the bat. It's really nice. So voxel size of 3. See, we didn't have to go super low to get it. And sometimes we're going to go ahead and tweak some settings in here, but it's pretty cool that you can see the difference between the fire and the smoke and stuff. And we have the emission, everything's looking pretty dope. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about some controls. So there are the main controls that you're going to want to control are density buoyancy, temperature buoyancy, and vorticity. That was fun to say. So density buoyancy is going to be what controls your smoke. Density is your smoke, temperature is your fire. Okay, that's the easiest way to think about it. Vorticity is kind of the amount of chaos inside of it, like how it's like flippity floppity and around. I'm wiggling my arms around if you can't tell. But it's kind of the energy of the fire, if that makes sense. It's very important to note that inside of your simulation settings, when you hit Control D, we have the scene settings. We need to make sure gravity is on and at a normal setting because Pyro does use gravity. With gravity off, these settings of the buoyancy don't really work right, okay? So we'll see we have our Pyro settings here as well as our Pyro settings here. They're exactly the same. So density buoyancy. If we come in here and make this even lower, it's going to really raise up a lot faster. So it's going to say, I want to be a lot lighter than air, so I'm going to start shooting smoke up really high, really fast, versus it being at -2. Zoom. So you see it's got a lot more energy coming out and wanting to float up a lot faster. Which is cool. Okay, so that's controlling our smoke. And so if we come back here and we say, let's do like 100, it should shoot it down, right? Our smoke should go down. Ooh, look at that. Pretty cool. So hopefully that you understand that negative value means it's going to go up. Positive value means it's going to go down for the density. Now, to keep it simple and not confusing, temperature is the opposite. For temperature buoyancy, it's kind of the opposite. If we take this and we lower it down to -1, we hit play, you're going to see it shoots our fire off down low, right? But our smoke is still going to want to, after it burns, raise up in the air. So this controls our fire, and the velocity of it, is a lot. So if we come in here and say 2 is a very high value for the temperature buoyancy, not so much the density buoyancy, okay? But see, you can raise that value up, and we really get it spraying out like a jet engine. But then we go really low value, and we get kind of a more, subtle burn, right? So the default is 0.015, which is a very small number. I don't know why they do this to us. Why don't they just adjust everything so it's whole numbers, just scale it so it's easy for us. Okay, but there we go. And then vorticity strength is going to be kind of the chaos like I talked about earlier. I'm going to say like 10 for this, and we hit play. And you're just going to see it's just going to be a little more chaotic. We're going to get a lot more of these little plumes and stuff popping up, and it's just going to have less of that fluffy vibe and more of like a really busy high heat. See all these little energy pockets here, if that makes sense. Okay, so we're looking pretty good. So what we want to do to create what you saw earlier is we're going to take our density buoyancy and lower it to -200, mainly because I don't want to have to wait 90 frames or whatever for my smoke to fill up my height. So I want it to shoot up faster so I don't have to wait. That's pretty much it. And then for our vorticity strength, we're going to set that to 2. Okay, so now we can talk about the fluid force factor and the substeps. So the fluid force factor is a really cool one. Basically, this is going to give it more of that like cigarette smoke wispy vibe to it, which I think is a really cool look. So we're going to go ahead and just crank that up to 10. And let's go ahead and hit play on this just so we can see what this is going to look like, slightly different. Very cool. So you can see already that it kind of has less of that, like this is before, and then we're going to look at this now. It has more of this like floaty wispiness to it, which I like, these like pockets of big heat. So the first thing we want to do in our Pyro object is we want to add a couple of substeps to this. If you're ever noticing that your smoke and stuff isn't really connecting well and it looks kind of more like wool or anything like that versus being smooth and connected, you're going to need more substeps. So we're going to go ahead and crank that up to 2. Surface emitter and surface thickness, just so you know, is going to actually create the fog around your object versus with this off, it's just going to create it like it's a hole, like it's just going to create it the volume of your object, but we want it to actually do it on the surface, so this is totally fine. And then we have density, which again is going to be our smoke. So I don't think it's really smoky enough, so I want to add even more density at the beginning, set it at 10, and then every second, it's going to add 10 more density. So basically, it's going to be very smoky and keep creating a lot more smoke. And then for the temperature, which is our fire, I think there's way too much fire going on, and I really think smoke looks a lot cooler. So I'm going to lower this down to 1,000. And then every second, it's going to add 1,000 more. So we're still going to have this flame burning, but we're not going to have it as intense from the get-go. Fuel, we're going to leave off. Velocity, we're going to leave as it is. And noise, we're going to leave as it is for now. Okay, so now we can go back into our Pyro object. Let's go ahead and go back, and let's go ahead and hit play on this. And you can see already right off the bat, it is way more smoky. And here you can see what I'm talking about with this weird like wool effect. See this? It looks neat, but it's like, it looks very woolly. And so what that issue is we don't have enough substeps. So we're going to come in here and we're going to add 6 substeps to this. You can see it takes a little longer to render because we have more substeps, but now we don't have that happening at all. It looks completely different, but it looks way better. So already we have this cool, you can see this is a lot more of that fluid force. You can see it's just kind of this cool wispiness going on there. I really, really like that. And our heat is a lot less intense. So this is looking really good so far. So now that we have it looking and acting a little bit like we want, there's a couple more things we can change to kind of control this. 1, I'm going to turn the turbulence up to 10. This is just going to create a little more basically movement noise throughout our smoke, which is going to make it look even kind of wilder. There's a lot of settings here. We're just going to increase it a little bit here. Combustion is going to be for when you want stuff to like burn and catch on fire. We're not going to mess with that right now. Dissipation, we are going to mess with. So dissipation is going to be like how long stuff lasts before it falls off and disappears. And honestly, right now, we don't want our smoke to go away. We don't want anything to go away at all. We want everything to just keep growing, which, you know, is going to up your calculation times because nothing's ever going away. But we're not really doing that long of an animation to begin with. We're only going to need like 24 frames or something. So all the dissipation down. Lastly, we have this smoothing section, which is your best friend for, let's go ahead and hit play on this. And we'll render this out real quick. And so you can see there's like these little areas where it looks kind of chunky and blocky and from our object, and that's where smoothing is going to really come into play a lot. So we're going to go ahead and take our density smoother and crank it all the way up, because the thing that's going to be the most blocky and stuff is going to be our smoke. So we're going to go ahead and increase that density smooth factor all the way up. We've got a lot more settings here, but we don't need to mess with any of those just yet. Okay, so everything is looking good, how we want it. I'm pretty happy with everything. What we can do is we can come down here and lower our voxel size down to 2 and probably not break our machine, and we might get a pretty good result. We're going to save very often, Pyro Tut 3. It might be the third take of this. And so we're looking pretty good here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into our render settings. And if you're running into a lot of issues where it's just like not working well, or you're going to hit render and nothing is showing up, what you want to do is you want to go into the Redshift tag here, go to the Advanced tab, and go over to your system. Inside of your system, you may need to lower your bucket size down, which will help, you know, actually render in time. And you may also need to lower your GPU memory down to like 80 or 60, something like that. So if you're running into a bunch of issues where stuff's not letting you render, these are kind of things that will help. These are troubleshoot these first, lower your bucket size down and lower your GPU memory down a little bit and see if that helps a bit. And then if those aren't helping, you might just have too much stuff going on in your scene as far as your, you know, voxels and stuff like that might be too intense. So now that we have our fire and smoke settings how we want them, we need to do one more thing before we hit render, and that is to cache this, just because it's going to help bake it in. So it's going to free up some GPU space, so it's not having to calculate that out each frame before it hits render. And this is going to help us just speed it up. We'll be able to play it and scrub through our timeline, as well as just work better and run smoother. So it's going to cache our entire timeline, and we don't need 240 frames. We just need 24. So that's going to free up a lot of space. So we're going to go ahead and say cache scene, and we'll choose where to save that. And go ahead and it'll start caching. So you might run into this issue where it's like maximum amount of VRAM allocated. Just hit OK. It's like determinism is not guaranteed anymore. Sure. Whatever. It just means it's not going to be so perfectly accurate. We ran into that in the last like few frames, so it's not that big a deal. If you run into that right off the bat, or early on, you just might need to back off your settings a little bit. They might be a little too intense. Now that we have that cached, we can scrub through our timeline here and see our fire explode up. So let's just raise our camera up a little bit above our ball here and take a look at just adding materials to this really quick and adjust our pyro volume. So if you have this issue, I had this issue before I cached it. After I cached it, clearly I have it working properly. So a couple things we can do. We need to go into our pyro volume options here and scroll this down. And here inside of this, we have density, scatter, absorption, and emission. And these two things are hooked up to our pyro tag here. And basically the way this works is density, the higher the scatter coefficient, the more it's going to let light scatter through your clouds. So you can adjust the color and stuff of that. So if you want this to be colored, tint that red, and you're going to get this really cool red smoke. Really awesome, right? If you have less in here, you're going to get less of that light coming through, so you get this darker smoke. Pretty cool. And you can also get darker smoke by coming here to the absorption. And the way this is going to work is this is going to kill off light in your scene. So the higher the absorption, the more it's going to kill off that light scattering through your scene. So you're going to end up with darker smoke. A little less, you're going to allow more of that smoke to wisp around. So a couple things we could do is we could lower this down pretty low to like 0.25, right? So we're going to get some of that smoke looking a little lighter. Then we're going to come in here to our density scatter, and we're going to make this sort of a dark gray because we want it to be kind of a darker smoke, but I like the fact that light is passing through it a lot. So we'll make it a little lighter, and then we can take this knot and just slide it down a bit. So we'll take this down a bit as well, and we still have these dark pockets where when it's really thick, it's hard to see through, but here on the edge, we're getting this nice wispy see-through smoke here. Now, lastly, we have the emission, which is going to be our flame. So if we crank that up to say like 3, we're really going to see that fire have a lot more energy and impact coming out. Now we just need to kind of adjust the lighting in our scene a little bit. We've got one light that's a little too strong. Let's turn that one down. It's our backlight. Our other lights will turn down as well. There we go. So now we're seeing more of just what this fog is looking like. We'll turn that backlight back up. Pretty cool. I like that coming through there. And so this is going to be a really good way to kind of see how this absorption is working and stuff. And one cool option that we have here is anisotropy underneath the scatter. And if we turn this up, we're going to get a lot more of that light coming through our smoke and stuff a little easier. If we turn it down, it's going to be a little harder for that light and stuff to get through our smoke. It's going to kind of push the light back. So we're going to turn that up a little bit and get more of that light coming through our smoke, which is pretty cool looking. And then we can take this scatter coefficient and turn it up to 2. So we get a little more of that whimsy smoke coming through. So now we're starting to look pretty nice. The absorption, I think we can turn up to 0.5. Yeah, now that we have that anisotropy on, this is all looking pretty good. We'll crank a couple of these lights back up just a bit to light them up, but not too much. There we go. And maybe this one's just at like 2. Cool. All right, so now we can just come in here to our render settings, which a lot of this stuff is now in the new Redshift camera, which if you notice is not over here and you have to add it in your custom palette, but there is a new way to do that as well. And we'll cover that in another lesson. Okay, now that we have our material looking kind of how we want it, we just want to come in here and add some effects. We're going to turn LUTs on, and by default, there's a bunch of LUTs built into this. One of my favorite ones is Filmic Medium High Contrast. I like the way that one does a lot, and I have it set to convert log space. Then we're going to turn color contrast on, which has, I'm going to put a little bit of contrast on. Then I'm going to go into the red channel and just kind of pull those lows down a bit to give it kind of that bluish hue, right? Pretty cool. Turn the contrast. Yeah, it's good. If you notice, like exposure and stuff isn't here anymore. It's all in the camera settings now, which is not in these camera settings. It's in the other. See, it gives you the option to convert to a Redshift camera object. So we're going to say click. Now we have a Redshift camera object, which is just an RS camera. Doesn't have the tag anymore. Totally fine. Still going to work. Everything is now put into optical and lens effects. So basically they've shoved everything into here. Okay. So what we want to do is go to optical, and we're just going to raise that exposure up just a teeny tiny bit, like 1. Looking pretty good. There we go. We could maybe make our background a little darker. Kind of looking how we want it, and we're ready to render. Let's go into our render settings, go to Redshift. We're going to keep optics on. It's faster, but if you're not getting the results you want and it's blurring it kind of weird, Altus Dual and Altus Single are really great options. And as far as the settings go, just make sure when you're doing an animation to, in the advanced tab, have the random noise pattern off. And then instead of here, we're just going to go ahead and say medium for this and let that go. So we're going to hit save. And then we're going to hit render. Okay, there we go. We've got a pretty good looking final result. We might that. So let's go ahead and hopefully you learned something from this. See y'all next time.